Look closely at a photograph. Closer. Beyond the smiles and the perfect poses, you can sometimes see the faint outlines of a story not yet told. In the fall of 1958, this photograph represented the pinnacle of the American dream. It was a union of beauty, wealth, and immense power. Virginia Joan Bennett, a poised and gifted young woman, was marrying into a political dynasty that was capturing the imagination of the world. She was marrying a Kennedy. On paper, her life was a fairy tale scripted for the ages. She would become the wife of a United States senator, the sister-in-law of a president, and the potential first lady of a nation enchanted by the myth of Camelot. She was given a role in a grand historic play, the perfect wife, the serene mother, the silent, beautiful partner to a man whose destiny seemed boundless. For years, she played that part flawlessly. She smiled for the cameras. She raised the children. She stood by her man through triumph and unimaginable tragedy. She was, to the world, Mrs. Edward M. Kennedy. But a role is a cage, even if it's gilded. Behind the closed doors of the Kennedy compound, beyond the reach of the cheering crowds and the flashing camera bulbs, the fairy tale was unraveling. The story the public never saw was one of profound loneliness, of a vibrant identity slowly being erased, of a sensitive soul crushed under the weight of a legendary name. It was a story of secrets and betrayals, of private grief transformed into public shame, and it was the story of a woman's desperate, decades-long battle with the twin demons of depression and alcoholism, a battle fought in the loneliest place on earth, the heart of a powerful family that demanded perfection and could not tolerate the messy reality of human frailty. This is not the story the headlines told. This is the story of the woman behind the facade, a story of the devastating price she paid for that famous name and the quiet, stubborn courage it took to finally reclaim her own. This is the story of Joan. To truly understand the cage that was built around Joan Kennedy, you have to understand the era that designed it. The America of the late 1950s was a nation brimming with post-war optimism, but it was also a society governed by rigid conventions. For women, the path was narrowly defined. The cultural ideal, famously dubbed the feminine mystique, was that of the happy homemaker, a woman who found her ultimate fulfillment in serving her husband, raising her children, and maintaining a perfect home. A career, an independent thought, a personal ambition, these were often seen as secondary, even selfish pursuits. Nowhere was this code more fiercely enforced than in the unique ecosystem of Washington, D.C. A political wife was not merely a spouse, she was a strategic asset. Her performance was judged as critically as her husband's voting record. She was expected to be a flawless hostess, a charming conversationalist, a fashion plate, and a living embodiment of her husband's family values. Her own opinions, her own needs, her own past, all were to be sublimated for the good of the team. And there was no team more demanding, more powerful, or more mythologized than the Kennedys. This was not just a family. It was a corporation, a brand, a political machine built with the enormous fortune and ferocious ambition of its patriarch, Joseph P. Kennedy Sr. Having failed to achieve his own presidential ambitions, Joe Kennedy transferred his dynastic dreams onto his sons. He was the master puppeteer, the producer of the Grand Kennedy drama, and he controlled every aspect of the family's public image with an iron fist. He understood that in the new age of television, image was everything. The Kennedys were to be portrayed as vigorous, intelligent, heroic, and blessed with an effortless grace. They were American royalty. To marry into this clan was to be assimilated. The women who became Kennedy wives, Ethel, Jackie, and later Joan, were all subjected to this intense pressure. They were expected to adhere to the family's code of unwavering loyalty and public silence. Weakness was unacceptable. Scandal was to be managed, contained, and buried. And the emotional toll of living under this constant, relentless scrutiny was a price they were all expected to pay without complaint. It was into this dazzling, high-pressure world that Joan Bennett, a woman of gentle sensibilities and artistic passions, was about to be thrust. She was, in almost every way, ill-suited for the role of a Kennedy political wife. Born in 1936 and raised in the affluent New York suburb of Bronxville, Joan's World was one of culture and refinement. Her father, an advertising executive, provided a life of comfort and privilege. She was educated at the elite Manhattanville College, a Catholic institution known for producing poised, intelligent women, the same school attended by her formidable future mother-in-law, Rose Kennedy. But unlike Rose, who was groomed for a life in the public eye, Joan's passions were private and artistic. She was a gifted classical pianist, capable of playing complex pieces by Chopin and Debussy. Music was not just a hobby, it was the language of her soul, a source of deep personal solace and expression. She was also a successful model, her classic blonde beauty gracing magazine pages and television commercials for products like Revlon and Coca-Cola. She was intelligent, well-read, and possessed a quiet, introspective nature that stood in stark contrast to the boisterous, competitive energy of the Kennedy clan. In the autumn of 1957, that world collided with hers. Ted Kennedy, then a law student at the University of Virginia, visited Manhattanville to give a speech. He was introduced to Joan. He was immediately captivated by her beauty and grace. She was charmed by his larger-than-life personality and Kennedy charisma. A whirlwind courtship began, punctuated by glamorous parties and football games. But even in the thrill of the romance, Joan harbored deep reservations. Ted's world of politics and constant public performance felt alien to her. She worried that she barely knew the man behind the famous name. When he proposed, her first instinct was to say no, to ask for more time. But time was a luxury the Kennedy machine did not afford. Joe Kennedy had seen Joan, and he had approved. She was the perfect visual match for his youngest son's burgeoning political career. He pressed Ted to finalize the engagement. The momentum was unstoppable. On November 29, 1958, at St. Joseph's Church in Bronxville, Virginia, Joan Bennett walked down the aisle and became Mrs. Edward M. Kennedy. The wedding was a major social event, covered breathlessly by the press. Looking at the photos, she is the image of the radiant bride. But she was also a woman taking her first steps into a life that would demand the sacrifice of the very things that made her who she was. The music, the quiet contemplation, the private self, all were about to be placed on the altar of Kennedy ambition. The assimilation was immediate and total. Her life as Joan Bennett was over. Her new life as a Kennedy wife began. The expectation was clear. Her husband's career came first. Always. She moved to Virginia while Ted finished law school, and her world quickly narrowed to the domestic sphere. She became pregnant with their first child, Kara, who was born in February 1960. Just weeks later, still recovering from childbirth, she was expected on the campaign trail, stumping for her brother-in-law, John F. Kennedy, in his historic presidential run. She learned the role quickly. In 1961, their son, Edward Jr., known as Teddy, was born. The following year, it was Ted's turn. He ran for the Senate seat JFK had vacated. Joan was a sensation on the campaign trail. With her radiant smile, impeccable style, and natural warmth, she was a tremendous asset. She charmed voters, attended endless coffees and rallies, and stood gracefully by her husband's side. She helped him win, and at just 26, she became the wife of the youngest member of the U.S. Senate. She was, by all accounts, performing her duties to perfection, but the private cost was immense. The rambunctious touch football playing, fiercely competitive atmosphere of the Kennedy family gatherings was overwhelming for her. While the others shouted about politics or sailed with aggressive zeal, Joan often felt like a spectator. She would frequently slip away to find a piano, losing herself in the familiar chords of a Chopin nocturne. It was, as one biographer noted, her escape, her way of reconnecting with a part of herself that was getting lost in the shuffle. Then came the first of the great shattering blows. In November 1963, President John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas. The dream of Camelot was drenched in blood. The nation grieved, but for the Kennedys, it was an intimate, soul-crushing loss. For Joan, it meant supporting a husband and a family engulfed in unimaginable sorrow, all while maintaining a stoic public face. Just 8 months later, in June 1964, another crisis. The private plane carrying Ted to the Democratic State Convention in Massachusetts crashed, killing the pilot and one of Ted's aides. Ted himself was pulled from the wreckage with a broken back, a punctured lung, and internal bleeding. He would spend the next 6 months in a hospital bed, encased in a plaster cast. With his re-election campaign underway, the family faced a dilemma. It was Joan who stepped into the breach. In a remarkable display of grit and dedication, she took over the campaign. She tirelessly crisscrossed the state, giving speeches, shaking hands, and reminding voters of her husband's commitment to them. It was an arduous, lonely task, but she did it brilliantly. Ted won the election in a landslide from his hospital bed, a victory credited in large part to his wife's efforts. She had proven her loyalty and her strength. She had done her duty, but the strain of these successive traumas was beginning to take a hidden toll. The next few years offered a fragile peace, but the ground beneath her feet was permanently unstable. Then came 1968. In June, Robert F. Kennedy, the brother-in-law to whom she felt a close bond, was assassinated in Los Angeles, just moments after winning the California presidential primary. This second assassination was, for many in the family, even more devastating than the first. It extinguished the hope that had been rekindled after JFK's death. The grief was suffocating. Joan was so overcome that she was unable to attend the funeral. The family and the nation seemed to be trapped in a Greek tragedy. It was in the long, dark shadow of this loss that the event that would irrevocably destroy her marriage and her spirit occurred. On the night of July 18, 1969, Ted Kennedy attended a party on Chappaquiddick Island, a reunion for the young women who had worked on his brother Robert's 1968 campaign. He left the party late that night with one of those women, 28-year-old Mary Jo Kopechne. Sometime around midnight, his Oldsmobile sedan went off a narrow wooden bridge and overturned in the dark, swirling waters of a tidal pond. Kennedy escaped the submerged car. Kopechne did not. Kennedy failed to report the accident for nearly 10 hours. Back in Virginia, Joan, pregnant for the 5th time after 3 previous miscarriages, was on doctor-ordered bed rest. She learned of the incident not from her husband, but from a news report. The shock was cataclysmic, but her personal horror was immediately subsumed by the political crisis. The Kennedy damage control machine, honed over decades, roared to life. The focus was not on the dead woman or on the truth, but on saving Ted Kennedy's career. And Joan was once again called upon to perform. She flew to Hyannisport, a walking portrait of shock and grief. Just days later, she was made to attend her husband's televised address to the nation, where he gave a self-pitying speech about his jumble of emotions and asked the public for their prayers. The most excruciating performance was yet to come. She had to stand beside him in the Edgartown courthouse, a fragile, pregnant, silent prop as he pleaded guilty to the charge of leaving the scene of an accident. Her face was a blank mask of strain. The emotional and physical toll was too great. Shortly after this public ordeal, she suffered her third miscarriage. It was the emotional trauma, she later said, a masterpiece of understatement. Chappaquiddick was the final fatal blow to the marriage. It wasn't just the accident or the cloud of suspicion that would hang over her husband forever. It was the public nature of the betrayal. The whispers and headlines about Ted and another woman were a source of profound personal humiliation. The man she was forced to stand by was a man she could no longer trust, a man whose actions had led to a young woman's death and the loss of her own child. The loneliness she had felt for years now became a vast, terrifying abyss. And it was in this abyss that she began to search for an escape. She found it in a bottle. Her descent into alcoholism was not a sudden fall, but a slow, creeping surrender. It began as a way to cope, a way to numb the pain that was now her constant companion. In a remarkably honest 1978 interview with McCall's magazine, she explained the insidious logic of her addiction. "I found out that alcohol could sedate me," she confessed, "so I didn't care as much, and things didn't hurt so much." The alcohol was a balm for a multitude of wounds. It soothed the lingering grief from the assassinations. It quieted the anxiety of her precarious pregnancies. Most acutely, it numbed the searing humiliation of her husband's notorious infidelities. Ted's womanizing was an open secret in Washington, a constant subject of gossip that she was expected to ignore with regal dignity. Of course, the newspaper stories about Ted and other women hurt, she admitted. They went to the core of my self-esteem. It was easy to think that maybe I wasn't attractive enough or good enough, and if that was the case, I might as well have a drink. In the Kennedy ethos, appearances were everything. Her drinking, a direct symptom of the unbearable pressures of her life, was treated not with compassion, but as another embarrassing secret to be managed and concealed. She tried to talk about it, but the family code of silence was impenetrable. "I was embarrassed, and Ted was embarrassed," she recalled. "Everybody was embarrassed, but nobody would really talk about it." She was left to battle her demons alone in the gilded cage of their McLean, Virginia mansion. Then, in 1973, life delivered another savage blow. Her beloved 12-year-old son, Teddy Jr., was diagnosed with chondrosarcoma, a rare form of bone cancer. The only course of action was to amputate his right leg above the knee. In this crisis, Joan's maternal instincts took over. She became a pillar of strength for her son. Throughout his hospitalization and grueling chemotherapy, she did not touch a drop of alcohol. She was a constant, sober presence at his bedside. But the effort of being so damn brave all the time, as she put it, was depleting her reserves. The moment Teddy was on the road to recovery, she collapsed. The relief she so desperately needed, she sought once again at the bottom of a glass. She became a spectral presence in her own home. Her youngest son, Patrick, later wrote movingly in his memoir, A Common Struggle, about the confusion and pain of growing up with a mother who was there but not there. He remembered a beautiful, loving woman who would disappear into a fog of alcohol, leaving her children feeling adrift and alone. By the mid-1970s, Joan knew she could not survive this way. The pretense had become unbearable. In 1977, in an act of profound self-preservation, she made a decision. She left the opulent prison of her Virginia home and moved into her own apartment in Boston's Back Bay. It was a declaration of independence. She began seeing a therapist, started attending Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, and, in a crucial step toward reclaiming her lost self, She enrolled in a master's program in education at Lesley College. She was fighting her way back to the woman she had been before the Kennedys. Joan Bennett, the musician, the student, the individual. But the ghost of her marriage was not so easily exorcised. In 1979, Ted Kennedy decided to challenge President Jimmy Carter for the 1980 Democratic presidential nomination. Inevitably, the campaign called on Joan. They needed the illusion of a happy, united family to counter the Chappaquiddick narrative. And so once again she was pulled back into the performance. She agreed to campaign for him, standing by his side at rallies. A painful public charade of a marriage that was in private already over. The awkwardness of the arrangement was laid bare for the nation to see in a now infamous television interview with Roger Mudd. When Mudd asked Ted a simple question about the state of his marriage, the senator stumbled through a rambling, incoherent answer that spoke volumes. It was a moment of supreme public humiliation for Joan, a stark confirmation of the lie she was being forced to live. Ted's presidential bid failed, and with it, the last vestiges of their marriage. They formally separated, and the divorce was finalized in 1983 after a quarter century of marriage. But freedom was not a magic cure. The years that followed were a painful public spectacle of recovery and relapse. The paparazzi were merciless, documenting every stumble. There were arrests for drunk driving, embarrassing public incidents, and court-ordered stays in rehabilitation facilities. Each setback was fodder for a new tragic headline about the fallen Kennedy wife. But what this cruel narrative missed was the extraordinary resilience it took for her to keep fighting. Each time she fell, she got back up. In her long periods of sobriety, she painstakingly rebuilt her life on her own terms. She completed her master's degree. She worked with children with learning disabilities. And, most importantly, she returned to her first love, her sanctuary, music. She began to perform the piano publicly again, playing with orchestras like the Boston Pops. She co-authored a book, The Joy of Classical Music, to share her passion with children. These were not the actions of a tragic victim. They were the actions of a survivor reclaiming her soul. "It's such a relief now to be free," she said in an interview. "So much of my married life was about keeping secrets. Once you sober up, the whole idea is to become honest with yourself." Her journey had a profound impact. Her public struggle, as painful as it was, helped to demystify the disease of alcoholism. If it could happen to a Kennedy, it could happen to anyone. It chipped away at the stigma and the shame. Her children, having witnessed her battle firsthand, became powerful advocates in their own right. Patrick Kennedy, in particular, would devote his political career and life's work to fighting for mental health parity and addiction treatment, a direct and powerful legacy of his mother's suffering and the family's code of silence he was determined to break. Joan Kennedy's story is not a tragedy. It is an epic of survival. It is a testament to the strength of a woman who was systematically stripped of her identity, who endured an almost unimaginable series of traumas, and who was cast aside when she could no longer play her part in the grand political drama. She was expected to be a footnote in her husband's story, a beautiful broken ornament of the Camelot years, but she refused to be erased. She fought her way out of the wreckage, through the darkness of her addiction, and into the light of a life that was finally her own. She found her way back to her music, to her children, and to the grace and dignity that had been hers all along. Her sister, Candy, once remarked that if Joan hadn't left Ted, she would be dead. Dead from drinking and the sadness. But she did not die. She lived. She outlasted the scandal, the whispers, and the larger-than-life man in whose shadow she was supposed to disappear. Her journey is a profound reminder that it is never too late to reclaim your name, to find your own voice and to compose your own beautiful, resilient music. But even a spirit as enduring as Joan's has its final chapter. In her later years, Joan lived quietly in Hyannisport, the same Cape Cod enclave where so many of her most painful and public memories had once played out. The Grand Kennedy compound, which had once echoed with the sounds of political debate and touch football, became a more subdued place, a space where she could listen to music, watch the sea, and exist outside the harsh lights of the public eye. Her health, however, began to decline. Decades of emotional trauma, alcoholism, and solitude had left their mark, not just on her body, but on her memory, her sense of time, her very grasp on the world around her. In the 2000s, she was diagnosed with cognitive impairment and eventually with dementia. Her children made the difficult decision to place her under legal guardianship, citing concerns for her safety. Once a woman who had fought so hard to reclaim her name and voice, Joan slowly drifted into a quieter realm, one where music still played, but the memories began to fade. On August 9th, 2020, Joan Bennett Kennedy passed away at the age of 84. Her death was not marked with the fanfare that so often accompanied the passing of a Kennedy. There were no grand funeral processions, no sweeping television retrospectives, but in homes across America, especially among those who had lived through the Camelot era, who had witnessed her dignity through humiliation, and who had followed her long battle toward healing, there was a quiet moment of reflection, a recognition, a nod of deep respect. She was not just the former wife of a senator. She was not just a mother of political heirs. She was a survivor of one of the most merciless machines in American public life. She was a musician, a mother, a woman of grace who fell and rose again more times than most could bear. She did not die broken. She died free. And perhaps that is Joan's final act of courage, that in a family so often defined by tragedy, scandal, and myth, she leaves behind something different, a legacy of quiet strength, of truth, of resilience, of music. We're done for today. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this helpful, smash the like button, comment below, and hit subscribe for more great content coming your way and soon.